They both said that they had seen the woman, Ashling Murphy, in a tracksuit. One of them said it looked like a GAA tracksuit. She also said that paramedics arrived on the scene and tried to resuscitate Miss Murphy but couldn't do so she was then pronounced dead. She also outlined that there was a DNA sample taken from Jozef Puska that matched DNA that was recovered from underneath Ashling Murphy's fingernails, and she said that there's a 1 in 14,000 chance that this DNA belonged to another person.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're listening to Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the sins of the underworld in Ireland and across the globe.
The trial of Jozef Puska, accused of the murder of Ashling Murphy in Tullamore in January 2022, opened at the Central Criminal Court this week. Today I'm speaking to Crime World's Clodagh Meaney about the witnesses who came upon the scene and the prosecution's opening statement. I'm Niall Donald and this is Crime World, a podcast from SundayWorld.com. We had the second day's evidence is just completed, Clodagh. Yesterday was really the opening statement where the prosecution are laying out their case. Their case is obviously that Jozef Puska is guilty of murdering Ashling Murphy. And we heard an opening statement yesterday. But today we heard from a lot of witnesses who came on the scene. Really was the bulk of the evidence today. And who was first up today?
So today, the first witness on the stand was actually Detective Sergeant Paul Curran. Now, he was just there basically to give evidence that he was the one who took photographs of the scene. He took a number of different photographs from the scene on the ground and as well as from a drone from above the ground. So he just explained that he was the Garda there on the day and he described each image to the jury. But interestingly enough, then we had two very significant witnesses on the stand this morning. The first of those was a woman named Gemma Stack. Now, she's a primary school teacher from Tullamore on the day of the January 12th, 2022. So the day that Ashling Murphy was killed, she finished school, so she was a teacher as well herself, perhaps a different school to the one that Ashling taught in because as we know, she was a 23-year-old school teacher. That day she met a friend at about 3:10 on the Dangan Road car park to go for a run along the canal. Now the Dangan Road car park is adjacent to the canal, so the plan was that they were going to meet there, and her friend Aoife Marin was on maternity leave, so it just kind of suited them to go that time that day. Usually they would never jog around that time. They normally go on a Saturday, but for whatever reason the Saturday prior they had missed their run, so they decided to meet up and go that day. Now Jenna Stack was she left her car in the car park unlocked because her daughter was in the secondary school the other side of the car park, and she was conscious that her daughter was in the car waiting for her, so they said they were going to have a quick run, and to them a quick run was 7 kilometres, so three and a half up and 3.5 back, and she was conscious that she had to get back to the car for her daughter who was sitting there in the unlocked vehicle. So that day, they started out on the run and everything was normal. She said that on the course of the run, she saw an luminous green bike in hedgerow. Now this stood out to her because she thought it was a very fancy looking bike, and she kind of wondered out loud to her friend Aoife what it was doing there. She thought that it didn't look like somebody had fallen off it in particular.
And you wouldn't expect to find bikes lying around of any type.
No, not particularly, this very fancy bike. Another thought that crossed her mind that perhaps it had been stolen and then kind of hidden because it was kind of in brush. So she kind of wondered out loud, and they kind of continued jogging on. A couple of metres later, they could hear some distinct rustling in the hedgerow at the side. At this point, she said she looked through and she saw a man in the hedgerow, and she said that he was holding down a girl. He was hunched over her. Now, while she went on to say that she couldn't actually see his arms, his hands or his legs, she could see that he was hunched down over her, and it looked, because she was looking down this kind of ditch which was kind of slanted downwards in towards where the man and the girl, she was looking down upon this, and she heard this rustling, kind of like branches cracking, and she kind of got a bit of a fright. She said that
They attempted to intervene or to try and find out what was happening?
Yeah, so at this point she kind of thought that maybe the man had fallen off the bike and into the ditch, so she kind of asked,
are you okay? I think it was. Do you need help?
Yeah, so she was asking if he needed help, and then he turned around, and she said that she noticed he had these distinct eyebrows, his teeth were kind of gritted, and he kind of shouted, "Get away" at them. The man that was in the hedgerow was wearing a navy bomber jacket. She said that he spoke with a foreign accent as well. And again, she couldn't see his legs or his hands, and she couldn't actually hear anything, but she inferred that he had his hands over the girl's mouth because she couldn't hear any screaming, but she could see her legs kicking.
And so at this point, she obviously recognised there was a woman there as well. And she, at this point, she does describe, and it was, very sort of vivid detail, I suppose, about how the woman seemed to be struggling and attempting to survive, basically.
Yeah, so at this point when she was kind of describing this, she got visibly kind of distressed on the stand, and you could hear a lot of emotion from her family, from Ashling Murphy's family. The woman said, Jenna said that the girl was lying on the ground and using all her strength, kicking like a scissor. She said that she could see, and obviously this woman, she's going for a run. She kind of knew she knows, her way around a gym, I would say. She kind of said that it seemed like she was using her core muscles and kicking her legs as hard as she could. She also said, quote, to the man, quote, I'm calling the guards to get off her, in a bid to get the man to leave the girl alone. At this point, he bunched up and made a sudden movement as if to go and frighten them. Jenna also said that at this point, she knew something bad was happening, and she said, quote, I thought he was going to rape her.
Yeah. Now, at this point as well, obviously the two joggers left the scene, and they didn't have their phones with them, obviously, because they had been running. So they seem to have described trying to then go and find somebody else to help them, basically.
Yeah, so they described that what happened was they kind of left the scene running. They were kind of panicked. The other woman, Aoife Marin, said she didn't really think much until Jenna suggested calling the guards, and at that point she thought she was terrified, and she thought that the man was going to come after her. They first came upon two men who were standing up at the top of a bridge, kind of away from the scene. And here they said that they interacted with these two men and asked them to call the guards, but they became frustrated with these men because they weren't really acting with any
urgency.
Whatever, yeah, they were kind of taking a bit of time. So what happened was Jenna stayed there, and Aoife ran over to the house of a man that she knew who was a mechanic. She went to his house and got a phone to contact the Gardaí. Jenna, she also went to another house. Actually, her brother-in-law's parents lived nearby where this bridge was, and she went to that house and explained what happened and asked for a phone to ring the guards. She tried to tell them where she was and what was going on.
Yeah.
And that she thought this woman was being raped.
Yeah. So obviously then these women are taken through their statements, which is normal in a trial like this. And then they were ultimately cross-examined by Mr. Puska's defence counsel. Obviously, Mr. Puska has pled not guilty to all the charges. So what was his kind of line of questioning, I suppose?
His line of questioning to the witness was it possible that Mr. Puska was actually just helping the woman in the ditch? She said that she couldn't see his legs, and the defence counsel had asked, well, is it perhaps because his legs were stuck in the briars? It was a very brambly area at the side of the overgrowth was very overgrown in that area. And she said, she believed from kind of the energy she got from what was going on between the woman's legs and the fact that he was crouched over her, the fact that she said that he kind of turned around and growled at them, that this was not the case.
Yeah, and I think even the defence counsel even said that it could be that his client wasn't intending to be aggressive, and that what Miss Stack had heard was Mr. Puska calling out in pain. I think he was saying he could have caught his legs in the briars. Yeah,
so that's what the defence had put to the witness, that perhaps it was the case that Mr. Puska wasn't actually the person who had maybe perpetrated this injuries on Ashling Murphy, and it was in fact he was just on the scene trying to help.
And of course he did say specifically that he had been instructed by his client that Mr. Murphy was holding Mr. Puska's forearm, or as the witness described, because he was trying to stop the bleeding. You didn't see that, defence solicitor asks, and Miss Stack says no. So that's obviously going to be that's a key bit of the evidence today. Obviously, the guards, the prosecution take the witness through the case, and then they get cross-examined. Now, in the afternoon, there was a number of other witnesses from people that were in or around the scene on the day.
Absolutely, yes. There was two other men on the stand. There was Enda Malloy, who is a Tullamore native who Aoife knew, and he also knew Aoife, who was one of the joggers one of the runners that had come across the scene. And there was a man named Janusz Wilko, who was a Polish man who lived in Tullamore. Now, he gave his evidence through a translator. Both of their evidence was basically that they had been there, they had bumped into both of the runners, they had seen the runners, i.e. Aoife and Jenna ahead of them, the other side speaking to two men, and they were kind of loud, waving their arms. They seemed to be agitated. This was at the point where Jenna and Aoife were trying to get those two men they'd seen to call the guards, but were being very slow about it. At this point, then, there was another two men, Charlie Kelly and Colin Pettit, who were also on the scene. Now, they had been on the canal that day cleaning it. They were power cleaning it, and they were working for Waterways Ireland, and it's their job to kind of upkeep the canal. Now, on that day, they were there, and they had also run into the two runners who, they also said were agitated and distressed. And the women had said to them two men, there's a woman being attacked, there's a man on top of her. And they said that there was also a bicycle down there. Now, one of them said that his initial thought was that there had been a bicycle crash, and the other one sort of thought, well, these things can happen between couples. They didn't really think anything more of it. However, they did rush down towards the scene while the two women went on to get help. At this point, they also bumped into both the cyclists. Now, both of those cyclists, Enda Malloy had been speaking to Aoife and was on his way back to the scene anyway. Because he was on a bike, he was able to get there a lot faster. But the two men bumped into Janzus Wilco, who they asked to go back to the scene as well to try and help again because he was on a bike and he could get there a lot faster. So they both cycled back down to the scene. At this point, Enda had been on the phone to the Gardaí reporting what had been found, trying to explain where he was. He knew the area very well, so he was able to tell them between what bridge and what kind of pathway they were on. And the two men were also there. They observed the scene. So they both said that they had seen the woman, Ashling Murphy, in a tracksuit. One of them said it looked like a GAA tracksuit. Her face was covered with her long hair. One of them said that her leg was suspended up against a tree and she had a small smear of blood on her left hand. And he said that he knew that she was dead because there was a little colour on her hands. He said that they were very pale. And the other one as well mentioned that they were in wet gear and that they didn't touch the body. None of the cyclists touched the body, neither did those men, nor did they touch the bicycle that was on scene.
So this is all kind of filling out the picture from the people who were there at the scene. I mean, this is the second day of the case. The first day we had, I suppose, the opening statements in all these cases, the prosecution go first. They're going to make the case that this man, Jozef Puska, is guilty of murder. Obviously, his defence then will say he is not guilty of murder. He's pled not guilty. But the prosecution laid out their case in an opening speech. Anne-Marie Lawler, senior counsel. I mean, what evidence has she told us that she's going to present through the course of this trial?
Yeah, so as you said, the opening statement there, it's, she kind of did state that it's a roadmap of the evidence expected to be heard in the future. What she says isn't the actual evidence. So the case is being heard by Mr. Justice Tony Hunt. Had opened there yesterday in front of a jury of 9 men and 3 women. So during the opening speech, she kind of did that. She laid out exactly what was going to happen. At the beginning of her opening speech, she spoke to the jury, kind of spoke to the publicity around the case. She asked the jury not to take into consideration anything they heard outside of the courtroom. And she said that while the court won't hear much about the victim, Ashling Murphy, as the trial is all about Jozef Puska, she did ask them to be cold and clinical in their kind of approach to the case and ask them not to be sympathetic.
Yeah, because I mean that's sometimes people find that bit of court cases unusual in that the victim, you don't necessarily get a picture of the victim, but it's because there is one person charged with murder and the case focuses on their guilt or not guilt, as the case may be.
Absolutely. And I mean, I suppose with legislation in Ireland, they have a right to due process. So he's considered innocent throughout all this, even up to the point where they go off to do the deliberations. Yeah. He has to be considered as an innocent man. So she did reiterate that to them, that they had to kind of come at it with that kind of view. So she said that Ashling Murphy and Jozef Puska had no prior connection to each other and they didn't know each other. She outlined that Ashling left school at around that evening and she was killed around 3:30 p.m. She had gone to the canal for some exercise. Now, she described that Ashling Murphy had died a violent death. Now, we didn't know until yesterday what that death was because the post-mortem results were kind of held for the purposes of the investigation. So we heard that she received 12 stab wounds. 11 of those were to the right side of her neck. And she said that further evidence of defence wounds would be presented in post-mortem evidence. Now, interestingly, today, before the witnesses came to the stand, Mr. Bowman for the defence said that there was 3 admissions that he would make that were accepted as fact by Jozef Puska, which means that there are 3 things that he accepts are true and there is no need for evidence to be presented on those. So the 3 pieces of fact were that Ashling's body was taken to Tullamore Hospital, the second was that Ashling Murphy was identified by her brother, and the third that was the cause of death was stab wounds and no other contributory factors. However, prosecution may still bring post-mortem evidence to prove those defence wounds.
Yeah.
No one actually seen the attack, she stated, and she said that the trial would hear from the 2 witnesses, which we heard from today, who came upon the incident. And the prosecution said that, they would describe the attack and the attacker, both of which they did. They also heard today from others who were in the vicinity, she outlined yesterday in the opening statement. She also said that paramedics arrived on the scene and tried to resuscitate Miss Murphy, but couldn't do so she was then pronounced dead. She also outlined that there was a DNA sample taken from Jozef Puska that matched DNA that was recovered from underneath Ashling Murphy's fingernails, and she said that there's a 1 in 14,000 chance this DNA belonged to another person.
So, and also then there was the Garda interviews, obviously after Mr. Puska was arrested. They were also detailed in the opening statement. What was said there and what Mr. Puska said to the Gardaí at the time.
Yeah, so at the time, they kind of went through some CCTV evidence. So that seems like it's going to be a big feature in this case. But what happened was Jozef Puska first came into contact with Gardaí when he was in hospital in St. James's Hospital on the 13th of January. Now, he was taken to that hospital by ambulance from a home in Crumlin. He was seen on CCTV arriving at that home in Crumlin on the morning of January 13th. At about lunchtime, CCTV showed him leaving the house in Crumlin by the ambulance. And now when he went into the home on CCTV, he had a full beard. But when he came out of the home, he had no beard. He was clean shaven. He was then taken to the hospital where he had said he was stabbed. Now, there was a stabbing in Blanchardstown, I think the day prior, and he had told Gardaí that he was a victim of that stabbing. However, what Jozef Puska was telling Gardaí didn't actually kind of total up with what had happened.
According to the prosecution, anyway.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, they said that the story didn't match what he had told Gardaí about the stabbing. And then after hearing how the man had travelled from Tullamore to Dublin, investigators back in Tullamore on the Ashling Murphy case went to speak with him. The jury will hear 2 separate discussions that Jozef Puska had with Gardaí. In one conversation they had, he was asked about his bike, which he said he didn't have in his possession for about 2 weeks. And during a second visit in which Gardaí returned to the hospital, this time they came back with a search warrant. And when Gardaí said that they were investigating Ashling Murphy's death, he allegedly told Gardaí, quote, "I did it, I am the murderer." He also said that he didn't do it intentionally and alleged that he said that he was sorry. He also expressed worries about the safety of his family because he was in fear that the Murphy family might carry out a revenge attack and hurt them. He also went on to allegedly say that he saw a girl that he never saw before and he had a knife with him in his possession that he used for a chain. He then said, quote, "When she passed, I cut her neck and she panicked, I panic," he said. And then he allegedly asked, "Will I go for 10 years?" before pointing to his stomach and said, "I do this." It's at this point then the prosecution said that no one knew how Ashling Murphy died, but he did. And then the jury heard from 2 witnesses who basically, they were just 2 witnesses. One of them was a cartographer who was a civilian member of Garda Síochána, so he basically makes maps. So he kind of presented his maps to the jury, outlining the area of the scene around the canal, the different areas that the witnesses then went to get help, and where the CCTV footage that we will eventually see was taken. So he was just confirming that. And the second witness we had was a Garda photographer who kind of just gave evidence of photographs that she had taken of the scene. She'd got there that evening. There was industrial lighting set up to take the photographs. It was 7 o'clock. It was a January cold dark evening. She said that inside the tent there was a female inside, and she presented her booklet of photographs that she took of the scene to the jury. And those photographs included a bicycle, a pink bobble hat, blue Nike runners, and some bloody sticks and brambles within the overgrowth.
So the case is into day 2. Is there any suggestion about how long it could run, or?
At present, the prosecution is looking at about 4 to 5 weeks. Again, this is how long is a piece of string. We don't know how long it will be.
No, and of course then the defence have to present their case, and that's sort of unknown, of course, at this stage. Well, it's no doubt something that we'll try and keep coming back to, and trying to keep update on Crime World. So
absolutely.
Okay, thanks very much, Clodagh.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Crime World, a podcast from SundayWorld.com, produced by Ian Mullaney and edited by me, Nicola Tallant. Research assistant is Clodagh Meaney. If you like this show and love true crime, leave us a review, or why not download the free SundayWorld.com app for lots more stories from Ireland and across the globe.